Welcome back to our next Math That Matters class. Glad to be with Pete. Did my head look healed up a little bit today?
I think it's really doing well. So
It's only been about a half hour, but it's a miracle.
you're like Wolverine. You heal quickly.
Oh, I like that movie. Okay, we left our last class at the end with an intriguing question, which was, how can we save money in loans? I mean, other than not taking loans out, obviously, but once you're in a loan, what are some strategies to save? And that's going to be the focus of today's lecture. Probably one of the most meaningful and applicable lessons they would have.
Very relevant, very important.
Yeah.
You will use this in your life.
Pete, without getting specific, your understanding and knowledge of what we're going to talk about today, can you describe what difference it's made in your life? Without numbers, how much has it saved you? How has it worked for you? The stuff we're going to talk about today.
Boy. Well, let's just say I don't intend to retire soon, but based on some of our numerical financial decisions, I probably could, not and live real wealthy, but if I decided to liquidate things, and it really has been primarily applying these strategies to using money or leveraging money for, financial advantage.
Yeah, you've heard Pete and I reference this in some of our other videos, but this really can make a difference in your life. Knowledge is power, and in financial scenarios, it doesn't mean the kind of power maybe the world means. It means the power to have the freedom to live differently. And a lot of people don't take advantage of any of these things we're talking about because they're not aware of them.
Yeah, and it's simply decisions, right?
It really
it's
is.
like options that you have that you could take, but if you don't know, you just do.
Yeah.
You go with the
people
flow.
aren't being rebellious or stubborn. They just don't know. They don't know. So you now are educated.
We're going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars
Hundreds
today.
of thousands of dollars.
Hundreds of thousands of
Yeah,
dollars.
we're not exaggerating. You're going to see how much money you can save today. I'm really excited about today's lecture, so let's jump into it. And to illustrate things, I thought we should just use a very special loan to me, which is my actual house loan. So here it is up there, Neal's house loan. We have a loan amount of $260,000. We had to go to the bank and ask for $260,000 in order to live in the house we're living in now, which is kind of a painful thought. We have a 30-year loan, which we'll talk about later. Maybe not a good idea, but we'll talk about that. And this is not really true, but I'm going to imagine an interest rate of 5.5%, which is higher than what is current right now. We're making this video, but it's probably what's coming soon down the pipeline, so very relevant to your. And of course, we use our magic formula, and what we don't know is what our payment is. So we did a quick calculation. We put all the terms in up there, and that means we got to pay $1,475 every month for 30 years, and we will effectively have paid off our loan. Now, Pete, do you think that that's going to be significantly more than this, or just what's your hunch? In fact, let's ask them.
Yeah.
Without doing a calculation, we want you to stop the video and take a guess. When you add up all the payments, do you think it's going to be a little bit more than this, double it, triple it? What's your feeling about the total interest paid? All right, Pete, what's your hunch?
Well, I know too much. Without a calculation, it's really a problem. A 30-year loan is really a problem. 5.5% traditionally isn't that bad, but it's bad for right now. So I think you're in trouble, Neal.
I did the numbers here, Pete. So at a 5.5% interest rate, we know the payment is $1,475. I calculated the total paid back. Are you ready?
So that times 12 times 30.
Exactly, $530,000.
Actually, I'm a little bit surprised. I thought it'd be more.
It is more than double. I showed this to my son. He said, so does that mean we could sell our house for $530,000? It's like, well, that's a different question. The point was no. We're getting $260,000 and we're paying back double. And that means our total interest is this minus this, which you can see right here. It's $270,000. We are paying more for the privilege, for the fee to borrow the money than we are for the money itself.
Yeah.
Over 30 years.
That hurts.
It makes you cry. I see a little tear coming out of your eye.
I know, I am.
It's painful. Now, I have good news for you. We're going to talk about ways to save money so that this and this goes down, even though you're borrowing the same amount. Because there is a way. There is a way to save money, and I'm glad to tell you that we're doing it, and I know Pete's doing it also. When we left class and I asked you to think of some strategies to save, what'd you come up with? Well, there's three main ones that Pete and I want to talk to you about today, and we're going to show you an illustration of each one of them here in our loan. The first one you might have thought of is don't borrow as much money. Well, that's true, but Pete, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, you got to do what you got to do, right?
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, try to borrow less, but I'm not even going to list that because it's such an obvious strategy. But assuming that you do have to borrow this money, what is your next strategy? And the first thing that most people probably think is a lower interest rate. And Pete, do you agree that that's the first place to start?
Yeah, if something happens in the economy that causes that interest rate to drop, you do have the option to finance differently or refinance.
Good. And that actually has happened to us, and I'm really happy to tell you,
Yeah.
Pete, that the interest rate on our home loan is actually 3%.
That's really good.
Now, at a 3% loan, do we still have to pay $14.75 because that's the payment?
Not if you keep it at 30 years, right?
That's right. So notice we're going to change this calculation, and we're going to change this number and this number to 0.03. And when we do that, our payment adjusts. And are you ready? In fact, I'd love for you to take a guess. Don't do a calculation, but what do you think that does? How drastically does? Someone might say, well, it's half the interest rate, so it's probably going to cut this in half. Well, you wish. It's not that good because remember, a bunch of this is paying back that. So it can't chop it in half. But here's what I came up with, Pete. I should know this number. This is my actual house payment, $1093.56. I actually know.
Not bad.
Yeah, and I'm going to round it to make things easier. That's basically,
1094.
no, I'm going to even be better than that. Is it okay to call that $1,100?
Okay.
It's about
sure.
the same, just for ease of sake, and that's an approximation up there.
Okay.
Okay, so now here's the fun part. How much total are we going to pay back on this loan?
Okay,
at
so
our new interest rate?
$1,100 per month times 12 months times 30 years.
Yep, I did it. Are you ready? It's good news. $395,000.
That's a lot less than 530.
That's right. So our interest is the difference between those two, which is $135,000.
Wow.
Check that out, Pete.
That's a lot better deal than that, right? We
So-
don't want to pay that much back if we have an
So
option.
changing from 5.5% to 3% saved us $135,000.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Well done.
That makes me happy, yeah. And this is a public service announcement to all of you guys. When you get a chance to buy your house at low interest rate, you got to go for it.
Do it, lock it in,
Yeah.
because it won't stay that way forever. And
Yeah.
sorry to say it, it's low right now,
It's
but it ain't
low
going to
right
stay
now.
that way.
Yeah. The fun news is, though, over the next 30 years, even though interest rates may go through the roof, they may go to 15%. In fact, I think they probably will in our lifetime. I'm still dialed in at 3%.
Yeah.
Because once you lock your loan in, you lock it in.
It's fixed.
Yeah, so it's great news. So hopefully things will work out and it's a good time of life for you to buy your loan. Okay, now there's only so far you can go with this. So you can't go to the bank and just say, I want 3%, I want 2%. You
Right,
get what you get,
right.
right? There are some things you can do to get a lower rate. But let's assume that you've squeezed this as far as you can go. Is there anything else I can do, Pete, to save money in my loan?
Yeah. How about if you figured that was something you liked, but you could do better than that financially according to your budget? You could put an extra couple $100 toward that loan.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to go back and erase this. This is strategy 1. So hopefully you lock that away in your mind. I'm going to go for strategy 2 now. We're comparing to the baseline here. Strategy 2 is to pay extra. Now this might be counterintuitive to people, Pete, because the bank told me, Neal, you have to pay $14.75 every month. Why would someone pay extra if I don't have to?
We're going to show them. Yeah, right? Because they don't like this number, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Pete, why don't people pay extra?
Because usually people borrow as much as they possibly can afford.
Yeah, yeah, and we're going to talk about that at the end here, so pay attention to see what's going to happen. So let's say that we say, okay, in our case, we are going to pay plus $200 extra every month over the required payment.
Okay.
So I walk in,
$16.75.
that's right, because this is not against the law, right? Although I have to pay $14.75.
You can pay more if you want to.
I can walk into the bank every month or send my check in and say, here's an extra $200 just for fun.
Okay.
Right? Now, I want you to stop for a second and think about your amortization schedule. If you add any money to the payment, where does it go, Pete?
It means that the loan doesn't last as long.
That's right. And it all goes to principal. Every extra penny you pay. You remember how our payment was split up into interest and principal?
Right. Interest remains the same,
That's
at least
right.
for the first month. Yeah.
So paying extra helps. Okay, so
How much?
we're
does
not
it
going
help?
to do this calculation, but I hope you will do this calculation. If you go over here and you look up here, you're like, well, what's changing now? And this is a really important moment for you guys to stop and think. yeah, I'm changing 1675, so it doesn't make sense mathematically that I can put 1675 in here and this still works, right?
Right.
So if I change that number, something has to change over there, Pete.
I'm not tall enough to reach it, but T has to change,
That's
right?
exactly right. Notice this, you
You
guys.
still borrowed the same amount at the same interest rate.
That's right. This is a 30-year loan, and when we put 30 years in, it spit out, okay, to make it a 30-year loan, you have to pay $14.75. But if we come in and change this to $16.75 all of a sudden now, something has to give, and what gives is the T. So, Pete, my question is, how long is the loan if we pay extra?
Well, we would have to solve the formula
We
for
would
T.
have to solve for T. Are you
Did you
guys
do
ready?
that?
This is going to be some wax on, wax off.
This
We
is
got to
good
do some
stuff.
algebra now. So we got to do a little bit of nasty math, but it's for a good cause. So stick with us here.
So we've decided that we're going to need to take this formula and solve it for T, which requires a little bit of algebra. And one of the things that we've talked about is kind of looking at the big picture and making a plan or having a strategy for solving. For example, you see that this is a whole bunch of stuff. It's got a T in it, but it's being multiplied by capital R. So at some point, you're just going to want to get T by itself, and you could just divide both sides by R, because this is a multiplier, and you would expect in the final formula to see a P over R. You divide by R, and then that's gone. I would look at this, and then I would say, well, if this is divided by little r over n, if I multiplied by little r over n,
Good.
then that would go away, but it would produce an r over n. So I think I'm going to have like a P over a capital R, and I think I'm going to have a times little r over n. I'm kind of expecting something
Kind
to
of
show
building
up.
as you go.
Yeah.
P over R, and you're going to have an R over N.
Seems like that's going to happen. That's gone, and then this is gone.
Okay.
Now, it looks like I probably would just maybe subtract 1. There's a 1 minus, so I think there's going to be a minus 1 involved in that. Then there's a negative sign, which I don't like, so I'd probably change the sign or multiply both sides by a negative.
Okay.
And as you start getting closer and closer to the target, what you do notice is that the target is a power. The variable that you're solving for is a power, and you learned in an Algebra 2 class a long time ago that you would need logarithms in order to get that from being a power to not being a power, which is where we want it eventually. And then you'll be able to pull this in front of the log. You probably remember that. And then you just divide off by this little minus n. So in kind of thinking about how to pull this apart and reduce all of this, eliminate everything but t, you might kind of expect to get what Neal's about to write on the board.
Good. I love it, Pete. I like the way you unpack that, because I think this final solution will make some sense now, and you'll see all the steps that Pete was referring to somehow bound up in here. What we're going to have, Pete, is we're going to have a fraction, first of all. In the numerator, we're going to have the log of minus P over R
Expected that.
times R over N
Expected that.
plus 1. That's the minus sign that shifted some things around a little bit. All divided by minus n times the log of 1 plus R over n. Yeah, so when you go through all the algebraic steps that you walked us through, and we know we went kind of quickly, this is what you would end up. This is the way that you undress t in this variable, right? And you're going to have to use a log a couple times in your calculation. If you need help, come see us. We'd be glad to help you with that, but you can find videos online on how to do that. Again, in an Algebra 2 class, we would unpack this in more detail, but this is a financial math class, math that matters. What matters is that you can solve for time, right? Now, Pete, how are we going to use this back in this example?
Yeah, so it looks like we could plug in all of the variables here, and we could figure out how long we would need to make that payment if the payment indeed was $200 higher.
Beautiful. And notice the flip here. Up here originally, we didn't know what the payment was for a 30-year loan. So we put T as 30 years and we found the corresponding R. Down here, we don't know what T is, but we know the R is 1675. So we pop in 1675 and we expect T to come down. If I'm going to pay 30 years and it's 1475, if I pay 1675, T better come down. Well, I did this calculation for us, Pete. I put all the numbers in here, and I want you to do it on your own. And if you're doing it right, I got 22.5 years.
That's much better, isn't it?
That makes sense. Yeah. Let's switch back now, and I'll fill out the
Okay.
table here. High five on the way over. Fist bump. Okay. What that means is, how do I find this total payback now, Pete?
Well, let's see. It's $16.75 a month times 12 months a year, but I then multiply only by 22.5 years, so I've shortened my payback.
Notice the contrast, you guys. It was $14.75 for 12 months times 30, or you can pay $16.75 for 12 months times 22.5.
Yeah. And this is probably going to be a better deal, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you know your math well, Pete. I'm not sure. I need to find the right chart here. Okay, here we go. $455,000 total payback,
Which is better than $530,000.
which means my interest is $195,000. Look at that savings, Pete. How much is that?
That's pretty significant. That's 70 and 5
$75,000 savings.
just by putting an extra $200 a month. I actually don't have to pay $75,000
I am
that I would
shocked
have.
that people don't do this. I am shocked. If
Like,
you-
make the sacrifice,
Yeah,
right?
if you will pay an extra 200, and I asked you earlier, and you answered, the reason people don't do this is that they buy a house so that they have no room to pay extra.
Yeah.
When Susan and I went to apply for our first home loan, I remember this happened to you too probably. The guy said, you qualify for this much of a house. In other words, you can borrow X amount of dollars. And I knew my financial math, so I told him, we don't want a house that big. And he tried to convince us to get a house that would max out our ability, but I was thinking we wanted to leave room to pay extra.
Absolutely.
So we got a smaller house. And I'm glad to tell you that Susan and I don't pay our required payment. We actually pay extra
That makes a lot
every
of
month.
sense.
So we're trying to save some money.
Well done.
Okay, strategy 3. I feel like we've done everything possible, Pete. We either pay a lower interest rate or we pay some extra. What else can I do to save money in this loan?
Yeah, well, if you go to the bank and the loan officer isn't just trying to gyp you out of all your money, what they'll do is they'll say, well, why don't you pay it off instead of 30 years? Why don't you pay it off in 20 years? Why don't you pay it off in 15 years? Why don't you change that T to 20 or 15 and then see what happens?
Oh, I get it. So
Yeah.
number 3 is get a shorter loan.
Yeah, and actually what's kind of neat is what the bank will do oftentimes, and we don't have to factor this in, but oftentimes they'll give you a lower interest rate if you'll take a shorter loan because you're paying it back sooner.
And what's kind of fun to notice here, Pete, is that 3 is almost the same strategy as 2, right?
Yeah.
If you pay extra, in essence, you shorten the time of your loan.
Absolutely.
Or you can come in and get a shorter loan by decreasing T, and your R is going to go up.
Yep.
So it's really the same thing as this, but it's different because it's kind of which way you attack it, right?
Yeah, and if you do this, if you get a shorter loan, the bank is going to force you to make this payment. And if you don't but pay extra, then you at least have some flexibility. So I know you guys are thinking, it'd be nice to have the flexibility. If I have the discipline to make the extra payment, I might as well have that 30-year loan, but I'm going to pay it off faster than
Right, and as you mentioned, one of the huge advantages is often when you get a shorter loan, they will actually reduce your interest rate.
Yeah.
Because they know you're a good investment.
Yeah.
So let's do an example of this third one. Okay, so for our third strategy and final strategy, we're going to go with a shorter loan. We chose a 15-year loan. You can do a 20-year loan. There's all kinds of different terms here. Now, we got to stop and think, if I get a 15-year loan, is my payment $14.75 or is it $16.75?
It's not either of those,
It's
is it?
neither of them. What in the heck is my payment, Pete?
Well, we'd have to calculate it, right?
We do.
So we just have to calculate R, capital
Right.
R, and we have to put 15 in
Uh-oh,
where we have
I
a
can
30.
get there.
Yeah,
Oh.
I cannot. I will never be able to get there.
Sorry for the writing. 15. If I get 15, I did that work for fun, Pete, off the side
And
here.
what
I
was
did
your
a
payment?
15-year loan. I got a payment of. By the way, is it going to be? Let's stop and have them think. Is it going to be more or less than $16.75? You ought to be able to solve that with your thinking. Craig, do you have our answer? More or less than $16.75. We'll give you a second to think. Well, let's think about it. If going from 30 years to 22 and a half years brought it to here, and now I'm going to 15 years, I got to pay more.
Yeah,
I gotta
makes
pay more.
sense.
And you do, but it's not that bad. $2,050 a month.
Okay.
Now, I know what people are thinking, ouch, that's
a
a
lot.
$500 extra. It is, but watch the fun, okay? What is the total payback, Pete? How am I going to do it?
So $2,050 a month times 12 months in a year times, Well, only 15 now.
Oh, that's the best number
That's
I've seen
a great
yet.
number
Yeah.
right there. What'd you get?
Are you ready? This is
Yeah.
going to shock you. $370,000.
370 instead of 530.
Look at the interest. The interest is now, it still hurts. It's only $110,000.
Wow.
So when you compare the savings here to the original,
Wow.
it's $160,000 savings.
That's amazing. What could you do with the 160? There's the yellow car.
I
There's
could
the
buy,
Corvette.
I could buy 3 Corvettes for Susan with that. Yeah. And again, this is stunning, you guys, and people don't realize this. And you may ask someone, why would anyone not have a 15-year loan? Like me. I don't have one. Well, Pete, you know this. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
Susan and I are actually paying our house like it's a 15-year loan, even though we have a 30-year loan.
Yeah, and you have an incredible interest rate, so
Yeah.
that's good news.
So there's nothing that stops Susan and I, even though we have a 30-year loan, to say, we're going to give you $2,050. And I'll tell you, the bank's not really excited when we give them extra money every week. You think they'd be excited. They're not super excited because what they're seeing is, oh, shoot, these people are taking a lot of money from us, and they are. So this is really exciting. It's really powerful. It's one of the funnest things I think you can learn. And amortized loans are going to show up a number of times in their lives, right? Where are amortized loans going to show up for them, Pete?
Anytime you borrow, borrow money for college, if you borrow money for a car, money for a house, they're always amortized.
They're always
loans.
amortized. So think about that. You could go to your student loan. You could go to any car loans you have. You can go to your house loan and say, I am committed to applying one or more of these strategies so that I can save all this money. And think of what you can do with that money. Sure, you could buy a couple Corvettes. You could also, what if you just gave it to someone?
We
What
could
if you
just give
said,
it away.
yeah, here's $160,000 to this mission because we made some really good financial decisions.
Yeah, where your treasure goes, your heart's there too.
Awesome. To wrap things up, these are just a couple examples, and there's a lot of variations of this. I actually got something in the mail, Pete, where they offered to sell me a product for several $100s, but their product was basically just doing this. So they were going to have
So
me
you
pay.
weren't buying something, you were buying a service.
I was buying knowledge, and
buying
I already
knowledge.
have the knowledge,
Yeah,
so
well,
I
I
didn't
mean,
need
I
to
guess
buy
they're
it.
paying for this class, so.
But yeah, but there's lots of fun ways that you can save monies in your loan, and some of it just comes down to just being creative. You may think, you know what, I can't pay an extra $200 or $500. What about paying an extra $1? What about every month saying I'm going to pay $1 extra to my loan? You'd be surprised how much money that could save you. We actually have a homework problem coming up in a class or two where we'll show you the power of saving, the power of paying $1 extra every month on your house loan. So have some fun with these and feel empowered, and we'll see you next time.